Hello everyone, here is part 4, our final presentation on Reconstruction. Let's have a brief review before we start talking about the 15th Amendment. We've discussed the 13th Amendment, which outlaws slavery, the 14th Amendment, which ultimately bans the black codes that we discussed in part 2, and it states that they cannot appear in Southern legislation. So basically, all people must be given equal protection under the law. Now in part 1, I don't have it here on this slide, but you need to go back and you can rewatch that and re-listen to that information, but we have all the different Reconstruction plans that are discussed there, except for the Congressional Reconstruction, which is discussed in part 3. So we have Johnson's plan and Lincoln's plan in part 1. Part 2 talks about the black codes, sharecropping, tenant farming. Be sure you understand the differences in those. We'll be doing some discussion in class about those, but understand what those are. And then 14th Amendment, and now on to the 15th Amendment. So the 15th Amendment states that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, meaning that even if they used to be a slave, that means they can still vote. Even if they're black, they can still vote. Now, this does not stop Southern states from preventing blacks to vote. They get creative with certain laws, things like the grandfather clause, which states if their grandfather was a slave, then that means they can't vote. There's poll taxes, which charges a tax in order for them to be able to vote, and literacy tests that they must take in order to be able to vote. And Congress is going to have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So Congress will create whatever laws necessary to ensure that blacks are guaranteed the right to vote. So the 15th Amendment is ratified by the states in 1870. It gives all male citizens, including black males, the right to vote. Some Southern governments refuse to enforce these amendments, and they do so through violence and the other voting methods that I discussed. So the Enforcement Act of 1870 is created that gives the federal government power to punish those who try to suppress voters. In Georgia, they passed legislation called the Georgia Act, because Georgia is quite stubborn during Reconstruction, and they don't want to follow it. They don't want to reconstruct. They don't want to give blacks the right to vote. So they return Georgia to military rule, and they require the state to ratify the 15th Amendment before it can return to the Union. So ultimately, we need to talk about Reconstruction as a whole. How can Northern resources help the South? Well, we haven't discussed this in great detail, but we have the Northern resources. The Northerners, I talked about carpetbaggers that come down into the South. They build factories, giving the new freedmen jobs. They give poor whites jobs. More people begin to move into Atlanta, the cities where the factories exist. And this is going to lead us into how this new group of society, the carpetbaggers, it becomes an even bigger contested kind of, not a racial group, but an aspect of society that faces discrimination. We're going to talk about that type of discrimination that those carpetbaggers face in our next unit on the Progressive Era. But those are the Northern resources that help the South. They come in, they start to build industry, they build factories, giving people different opportunities for jobs rather than just farming. In what ways can the South rebuild its economy? Again, it goes back to they can't just rely on agriculture, because you saw when you looked at the data that when we began the Civil War unit, that the South just didn't have industry. And so because of that, they weren't able to win the war. The blockades, they stopped them from being able to get supplies in or out. They couldn't trade. And so that ultimately becomes the South's demise as the war goes on, because they just don't have the resources to fight anymore. So they must rebuild their economy by creating more industry. And so what can the government do to assist African Americans? And this is the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau. That's what the government does. Provides them with technical training, teacher training, all sorts of resources to rebuild their lives and become members of society in ways that they weren't allowed to be before. They can go out and get jobs, they can get an education now, and they can be treated as human beings versus property. Okay, so now that we've finished our portions on Reconstruction, we have to look at what your Edmodo tasks are going to be. All of these portions have been on Edmodo. You can go back and rewatch them as many times as you want to help you complete these tasks. And I am posting a response, a question that you need to respond to via Edmodo. And the question is, ultimately, did the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments do what they were intended to do for the citizens and states of the United States? Why or why not? Use evidence from the various video PowerPoints and look at your text. Look at any resources that you can find in addition to help support your response. You need to give evidence. You can't just say, no, they didn't support it and be done with it. You have to give me evidence to justify your response. You can't just say yes or no. You must give evidence to justify your response. You will also, so you'll respond to that post, that question on Edmodo. There is a quiz that is attached on Reconstruction that you must complete. It will grade it for you, and then the grades will be reported to me, and that will go in as a quiz grade in the grade book. The response to the ultimately, did the amendments do what they were supposed to do? That response will be a classwork grade on Edmodo, so you must respond, and then I will be looking to see that you make that response and giving you the grade for that. In addition, I will be posting a link to a Georgia story on Reconstruction, and then after you watch the Georgia story, there will be a quiz that is posted to go along with that you need to complete. And then that grade will go in the grade book as a quiz grade as well. So you will receive 1 classwork grade and 2 quiz grades from these tasks on Edmodo. And once we finish the next unit on the progressive era, we will be doing some review in class, and we will have a unit test that will cover Reconstruction and the progressive era. As always, please ask me questions on Edmodo. When you're working in class on your group tasks in class, please ask questions if you have them. I am available almost every morning, as you should have been aware, all school year. And if the mornings don't work for you, let me know and we'll try to figure something out. Either you come in during flex and we get your questions answered and help you get this work accomplished. And if at any point you have any technical difficulties, do not wait until the final due date to come to me and say, well, I couldn't get on Edmodo at all and get these tasks completed. Come to me as soon as possible so I can work with you and get these tasks done for you, whether it's getting you a paper copy of the quiz, whatever needs to be done to help you get the work accomplished. I will assist you in whatever way that I can. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed learning this way, and I look forward to hearing the class discussion as we do different tasks related to the topics within these presentations.